So now we're going to move on and talk a little bit more about some concrete skills, and I'll refer back to some of these previous slides as we're talking about some of these more concrete skills on how do you de-escalate and how effective communication skills, how does that work? And the first thing we really have to discuss is there's a difference between a crisis and an emergency. A crisis is really a situation that's defined by the person that's experiencing it. It's something that's getting in the way of their normal functioning and they're not able to cope. It's something that goes beyond their ability to kind of deal with the situation. And it requires some attention to help them reestablish, to regain that balance in their situation. An emergency is a situation where it requires a response from a medical professional or a law enforcement officer. There's a weapon involved and things of that nature. Then it's really crossed over into an emergency situation. And actually, interestingly enough, through crisis intervention trainings, many officers are now learning, and Maine is actually a leader in this area, how to use these skills, how to use their self to help de-escalate situations. So it's also important to think about what your goal is in de-escalation. It's really, your goal is to use your verbal, non-verbal communication, use your high road and your low road to help calm a child that's in crisis. The purpose is to avoid the crisis situation getting escalated or worse and becoming an emergency situation, also a loss of parental or adult emotional control and or the use of force. The goal is not to win. If the child is already in a crisis situation, no amount of consequences, no amount of trying to help them look at the future is going to help, because as we know, when they're in that fight or flight or freeze situation, if that's their experience, then they're not thinking about the future. They're thinking about getting themselves safe in that moment. So there's lots of skills that come into play when we're talking about helping somebody de-escalate. One of them is really active listening. It doesn't start with talking. It starts with listening. And this is all about eye contact, having an open body posture, being encouraging, validating their emotions, that this is real for them and that this is a difficult situation for them. You can do things like reflecting back to them what it is that you see. Oh, it seems like you're really, your hands are all clenched up and your face is screwed up tight, Johnny. It seems like you're very angry at the moment. Or summarizing what it is they're saying to you. Oh, so Susie, kicked sand in your face on the playground, and that got you upset, and that's where this situation started. So you don't have to be, saying that it's okay how they responded to that situation, but you can be telling them that their experience is valid, their emotions are valid. They are valid. So it's important to remember what I said earlier, that in average regular communication, about 50% of it, or half, is nonverbal, low road type communications tone. And so we can see from this graph, when you get in a crisis situation, the amount of communication that's happening through the content or the actual words you're saying becomes very limited, about 7%. And the other 93% is all made up of tone and nonverbal. And so it's very important to be thinking about what types of things are you saying to yourself about the situation, because it's through, wow, if you're telling yourself, he's just acting out to get attention, you're likely to be frustrated, and that's going to come across in your tone and your nonverbal. Whereas if you're telling yourself, wow, John's really just having trouble getting calmed down right now, then that might help you kind of reduce your negative emotion and response, and even have some empathy for the child, and that's going to come across in your tone and your nonverbal communication as well. So really, it's really important to use age-appropriate language. Don't use too big of words, even with older children and older people. Avoid being condescending or talking down to them. Your tone is so important. Maintaining that neutral tone. Avoid sarcasm. This is my big one for me. I put this in here as a reminder. I tend to be a little bit sarcastic. Or being annoyed with the situation, or having anger in your voice. Really, you need to maintain a positive nonverbal stance. It's all about what's going on inside. What am I thinking to myself, and how is that going to affect the way I'm emotionally responding in the situation? The nonverbal stuff is also about your stance and your position. With a small child, you might want to get down on one knee or be down closer to the floor. Eye contact, you want to be making eye contact with them, but not forcing them to make eye contact with you. They might not be able to at that moment. Your facial expressions, micro expressions are the little expressions that happen before we can, get a hold of ourselves, and so be conscious of those too as well. And distance or proximity. So sometimes, and with some child, depending on your relationship and the situation, getting closer to them might help them calm down. They might need a hug, but you want to say, do you want a hug? Can I give you a hug? And for a child that's on that verge of flight or wanting to run away, you really want to remember that proximity might just push them. If you get too close, it might just push them to run out of the room, and then you're dealing with a crisis situation that's gone mobile, and that can be a lot more difficult to deal with. So the fight, flight, or freeze response happens anytime a person experiences extreme stress that puts them into that situation where it's a life or self-threatening situation, or that's the way they perceive it. It's not about whether or not it really is a life-threatening situation or a self-threatening situation. That's the way they perceive it. And it's designed to protect the individual from harm. It's designed to help us fight off attackers and get away from dangers. So here we go back to this, that we can see on the left is how we respond to fight or flight, and on the right is how we were responding when we were getting rewards in our environment. Crisis situations are mostly about what's going on down in this left, and we're trying to get a person back to balance so that they can benefit from rewards in their environment. And so as they're starting to get calmed down, you can kind of offer them small rewards for getting to that next segment or that next stage and kind of de-escalating for themselves the crisis. As you can see from our facial expressions, fight, flight, and freeze have very different physical ways that they come across. Fight, you definitely get tunnel vision. The object of the person is to get rid of the threat or to defeat the threat. It tends to have a sense of all-powerfulness, that you can't make me do that, I can blah blah blah. Flight has definitely a much more wide-eyed and looking around for more dangers, really trying to take in is something, what's attacking me, and it's accompanied by this feeling that the person experiences that they are kind of less powerful and that they are not powerful at all and they need to run away from a situation. Freeze looks exactly like freeze. It's just, the person is usually huddled up and waiting for the threat to pass them by or go away. So coming back to what David Walsh had to say about neurons that fire together, wire together, the more times we can help a person who is experiencing crisis get themselves back to a calm state and move forward, and then the more times we can help them practice positive behaviors in their environment so that they feel safe enough to practice and experiment a little bit with these behaviors, those are the neurons that are going to fire together, and those are the neurons that are going to wire together. And we can actually help a child build a brain that is much more resilient, that can de-escalate themselves and reduce their own sense of crisis. It also increase their tolerance, their ability to deal with stress in situations, and not go into crisis. And here we see that again, this slide again, that kind of depicts that as from the neural pathways point of view and what we're strengthening. So just in kind of, to wrap it up a little bit here, keep it simple. Crisis communication, individuals in crisis aren't really processing information. Remember, they're thinking on that lower level of their brain. Here's a good example of just using 5 words in a sentence and no more than 5 letters in a word, really not overwhelming with that. Avoid asking too much too fast. Pauses and silence are golden. I mean, it may not seem like you're doing anything, but just being there and calming yourself and saying, if you've practiced ahead of time some deep breathing techniques, let's breathe slowly in through our nose and out through our mouth. Those type of things. And if the child is unwilling to go there with you, just doing it yourself, slowing your breathing, thinking different thoughts. Use their name. It helps ground them to the situation. Don't force, as I mentioned earlier, don't force eye contact. Be aware of any cultural differences that might be going on. In some cultures, it's disrespectful for children to give adults eye contact when they're getting feedback, and so you want to be aware of that and not force eye contact anyways. But just be aware of any cultural differences that might be there. And all in capital letters, listen. That's really going to help you focus in on what's going on for this person. Remember, it's not about you in this situation. It's about them and their experience, and so it might seem irrational to you, and it probably is. Fight or flight or freeze is not a rational thing, but it's real to them. So here's some questions to ask yourself. What am I feeling? What am I thinking? And what are some different thoughts I could have that would change the way I'm feeling? And that's going to really help you think about what are some of the strategies you could use to help resolve this situation. And speaking of those strategies, that's actually the next segment of this presentation, to be delivered by folks from the Maine Parent Federation, that you can click onto and go to next, or you can view at a different time. And I want to thank you very much for your time. Here's some resources for you. The 24-hour crisis line in Maine, as well as NAMI Maine operates a helpline during business hours, 8 to 4:30 Monday through Friday, where we can help you connect with resources, or if you're interested in more training and workshops, we can also help you figure out where those are going on and what those are all about. My name is Jeff Morrill, and I want to thank you very much for listening to me today and watching this presentation, and I hope you